Hi, everyone, and welcome to a CX Moment. I'm Sarah Reed from Zendesk, and today we are joined by Jeff Shah from the New York Times. Now, you may be tempted to ask Jeff all about the fastest way to solve Wordle or how to best your spelling bee score, but hold off on those, please. Because while the New York Times is now as well known for their word game fixations, at least in my house, as they are for the printed newspapers, Jeff is here to talk all about their care organization and the iconic brand, which has been around since 1851. I don't know if the care organization has been around that long, so we will talk to Jeff about that. And part of our conversation today is going to be about insourcing versus outsourcing. So let us know what your model is. Are you insourcing your care? Do you use an outsource partner? Do you have a blend of both? Drop that model into the chat, please, and we'll get around to that in just a bit. So now let's go ahead and say hi to Jeff.
Everybody. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Jeff. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Well, I think we all know how the New York Times legacy brand, but it's gone through this massive transformation. And you all now consider yourself to be a true digital brand. So talk to us about what that's done for the evolution of your customer care strategy, because I assume there's been some big changes there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, a care function should always be closely aligned with the company's strategy and where the company's going, right? Otherwise, it's just sort of a siloed cost center that isn't really sort of adding a lot of value. And so it's exactly right. The company has made this amazing shift from a legacy print and ad-based kind of subscription model to this digital subscription model where we're really subscriber first and we're really pushing people toward subscriptions rather, this like sort of digital bundled subscription. And so I think for like in care, what that's meant is like this big shift from a world with predictable problems. So things like I missed my delivery, I need to suspend my paper next weekend, to a much more complex sort of digital world, right? Issues around identity, like I'm having trouble signing in across all of your different services and products. Your app is broken. How do I play Wordle is actually a question we get a lot of. We even get questions about like, what do I, substitute in this recipe? What do I substitute for gochujang? So it's like this wide gamut of things. So the issues look really different, but also the customer behavior is different, right? So we've got people more likely, digital subscribers are more likely to solve in self-service, but that also means that the problems we get when they actually reach an agent are harder to solve. So we've had to make this shift between an old world where you focus on efficiency and productivity and standardizing the work to a new world where we're focusing on like the customer experience, building agent flexibility and critical thinking about the brand and the voice in different ways than we have in the past.
So let's touch a bit on this idea that, your care agents are getting all of these different questions coming into them. How much liberty do you give them to answer some of those perhaps not exactly care type questions, such as what do I substitute in this recipe, or how do I solve my Wordle today? Like I'm stuck. Like how much liberty do they get for that?
They get a lot of liberty. I mean, some of these are tough questions, right? Like I don't expect a customer care agent to be a master, chef, right? But it's been this actually really interesting conversation with our internal teams about what do their customers really want to know? What do they want help from? And it actually really struck me as interesting that anyone would write into customer care asking about a recipe, substitution. But it's like, it was this great moment where we discovered there was a customer need around this. And so, most of the time the agent can do a pretty good job at that and can figure it out. We've got a few agents who are really good cooks and love answering those kinds of things. And then we get help when we need to. But with the games too, we've worked really hard to build game knowledge and product knowledge in our agents so that they are Wordle experts. They're crossword experts, and they can actually help in a meaningful way to the customer.
Well, I think those type of questions, though, are also really indicative to how important the times is
Mm,
to someone's daily life, right? It's frequently the first thing that they open
right.
up in the morning, whether it's to peruse the headlines, whether it is to like check recipes for the week, to, hit their Wordle in the morning before they start work. It's like all of those things have become very just part of our day-to-day, like, just being. And so I think, those type of questions certainly show how important you and your organization are to many of us. Which brings up this question around insourcing versus outsourcing. And, we talked earlier, and you were saying that there were some big initiatives for the customer care at the New York Times about whether or not you should insource versus outsource. So, what has the mix been thus far, and what's your
Yeah.
vision?
Yeah. So traditionally, we've been a completely outsourced support organization. I want to say 5 years ago, we brought in a small team in house to do sort of test out different business models, test out sort of high touch care. Over the last couple of years, we've really solidified it to, we want this team to be the team that's really answering those cooking questions, those game
Mhm.
questions. And the reason for that is both like a quality one, right? I don't expect an outsourced call center with high, turnover to have, the kind of tenured agents to solve those kinds of problems in a way that I'm really proud of. But also, we want to have a really like tight feedback loop with our product teams. So we have these internal agents who are on in a Slack channel with New York Times Games engineers and product people and saying like, hey, got like 5 people who wrote into me this morning, where like, their Wordle is like frozen. What's going on with that? And that's like a really good signal to those teams, a really quick and fast signal to those teams that there's a problem, right? So for me, the question about insourcing and outsourcing has always been one of what do I want? What kind of skill do I want an agent to have, and what kind of environment are they going to thrive in, and what kind of like care problems do I have for them to solve? I think I realized, we were realizing over time, the growth in our care volume, the growth, like where I see like the most problems are on those like what we call standalone products, games, cooking, Wirecutter, these products where I want that tight feedback loop, and I want an agent to have more ownership over the brand, more agency. I want them to feel more empowered to solve that problem. So last year, I made a pitch to insource about 20% of our program
Okay.
and bring more of those agents in house. And yeah. So far, it's been this amazing sort of journey, and we're already sort of seeing like the positive impacts of that.
All right. So you make this pitch. Now, I came from the outsourcing world. I did outsourcing. I worked for a BPO for upwards of 15 years. Uh, Oftentimes people would come to us because they believed that outsourcing was the lowest cost model for them. And it was their ability to scale, be a lot more flexible, but because it was also a cost savings for them.
Yeah.
How did you convince the powers that be that maybe that wasn't the case, or maybe that wasn't as important for the times as
Yeah.
originally thought?
Yeah. And look, and it can be, right? And it often is. I think when I looked at the costs of an agent in-house versus an hourly rate that I'm paying, specifically an onshore call center, they actually weren't that far apart, right?
Mhm.
So I could make a case that I could meaningfully swap one agent externally for one agent internally. It's not that simple, of course, because you have to layer on management costs and support costs. But that was sort of my first step. Was I realized actually these things aren't that far away from each other, and so my pitch was really laying out internally. Look, here are the dynamics at a typical call center. You've got high attrition. You've got, it really works for kinds of topics that are highly trainable, that are repetitive, that are high volume, right? That's the right kind of thing. I looked at all my volume and I said, like, about 75% of my volume is that. So I'd like to keep 75% of my volume at the outsourced partners. But by shifting around where I had those partners, some more nearshore, so mixing, shifting that balance between nearshore and onshore, I was able to create some savings that I said, then I'd like to reinvest that savings in our internal team for these extra costs. But I'm not trying to make the case for it has to be 100%, it has to be in the majority. But here are the topics that I really want this internal team to support, and here's the impact I can expect to get out of it. And it ultimately was successful. It was a cost neutral proposition at the end of the day, which, I get to make that, like, I get to use that, play that card once, but like it was successful, especially, in the cost pressure environment that we're all in.
Did you have to change any of your tools or any of the technology that you use by now having this
Yeah.
insource outsource mix?
Yeah. So you have to replicate some of these services that you get from the outsourced world, right? So, often we do that because we don't want to invest that much in workforce management, in
Right.
scheduling, in performance management, and all these managers, right? So we did, we've had to put a lot more software in place. We've had to put a lot more processes in place, policies around, like, it's one thing when you have a team of 8 people, you can sort of manage their days off on a spreadsheet. It's a much
Right.
different thing when it's 50, 60 people, right? And
You
then
had to move beyond the spreadsheet. Yeah.
yeah. So, but that was all part of, and recruiting. You have to maybe have a dedicated recruiter. You have to, so there's all this sort of uh, these extra costs that you have to factor in. But for me, that was part of the pitch, was these things are worth it for the brand and reputational impact, for the impact on customer effort score, which is our North Star metric, which has a direct statistical relationship with retention and engagement. You have to make the pitch that it's worth doing that and taking on that extra burden.
And one of the benefits that I've always believed with having the mix is the learnings that you can have
Yeah,
back and forth from each other. There's a lot that an outsourcer can teach an in-house organization because they are accustomed to scale. They are
that's right.
accustomed to, mass scheduling and quality assurance and how to train quickly and how to do big recruitment efforts. And these are all things that in-house centers can certainly learn from. And likewise, you have
That's right.
so much now to teach about the product, about the culture, about the company, those nuances that it's almost impossible to push forward onto another organization without having an internal team doing the same. Which leads me to the piece you brought up a little earlier around product and care being intertwined. So let's talk a bit more about how you integrated care into product, because that is such a challenge at many organizations,
Yeah.
and it sounds like you may have cracked that a bit.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's something we're investing a ton in. We've over the years heard so much interest and appetite from the product org to be more tightly integrated with us, to understand what customers are saying. And I think, like a lot of companies, that you hear this from product. What are the top issues? What should I be focusing on? What are, like, the actionable things I can change in the product to make customers happier? So the big thing that we've done, like a lot of companies, we have a product support team that is basically in charge of the two-way feedback loop between us and product. So they're there to, if the product team makes a change to a feature, is launching a new app, is doing something, this team will, like, bring that communication down and sort of ready the care team and make sure agents understand what's coming, make sure management understands these changes are happening. And then they'll do the other side of the feedback loop, uh, which is surfacing insights from our data to those teams. So for us, we have an embedded model where we have, each product support manager sort of embedded with a different team or a different set of teams around the company, and they become specialists in those areas. So we have one that's dedicated to games, for example, and that person becomes this trusted confidant of the games team. In fact, like a couple of weeks ago, the games team had a big offsite planning for 2023, and they insisted that our care person sit in on that, right? And what a great
Ah.
opportunity for care to be involved in the very earliest moments and say, like, hey, this thing that you're going to do, I can see some real issues that customers are going to have with that. Let's get ahead of it. But also the opportunity to sort of push and say, here are the top 3 issues we continually hear from customers. What would it take to get that on the roadmap for 2023? We think that these things are really important.
Are there any hints you can give us on what's coming? Any new games for 2026? Any new
There,
features?
I suspect that there will always be new games. Like I would be absolutely murdered if I shared any secrets.
Fine. Well, we don't
Um,
want that to happen today.
but
But
yeah,
how did you keep product from feeling threatened
yeah,
when you brought up this idea of having care sit alongside them? Because that is oftentimes their perception. It's like, oh, we don't need care in the room
yeah,
with us. Like, you're going to get in our business. You're going to try to tell us what to do. You're like, you're not an engineer. You don't understand.
right, yeah. So I think it's in my mind, it's all about adding unique value to them that they can't get somewhere else, right? I think about care actually as like at the times we're sort of like the third leg of the stool of insights from like we have an audience insights group that's really does research and really understands like the customer perspective. We've got a data insights group that's doing deep analysis, A/B tests, all that stuff. And I see ourselves as sort of like the third leg of that stool, which is how do we can tell you what your customer sounds like when they're disappointed in the brand. And we can tell you what they sound like when they're really happy about the brand. But like when things go wrong, we can tell you exactly what words they use, what it takes to solve that problem, and what it takes to get them back to enjoying your product. And that to me is like, if I'm a product manager, I really want to know that, right? I want to know what it takes to get them. And we talked about this a little bit too. In my mind, like Care's job is to be an expert at being forgettable in a way, right? That like in my mind, when something goes wrong, that breeds disloyalty between the customer and the brand, right? And Care's job is to mitigate, to neutralize that disloyalty and just get them back to associating the brand with the product that they love. In our case, with that game, that recipe, that journalism, right? The physical paper. And so when I can be an expert at that and I can go to a product team and say, I know exactly what it takes to erase this problem from the customer's mind, but we would even do better if we could get upstream and solve that problem before they even have it. That's something that they really want to know. Now, I also think it's important to not go in there and say, I know exactly,
I know more
I
than you
know more
about
than
the
you, right?
customer, right?
And with any product person, no product person ever wants to hear, put a button here, build me this exact thing. But if you bring them a problem, that's catnip to a product person. They can't resist it, right?
Well, you are certainly getting some support from our audience today.
Oh,
Brian
awesome.
says CX is the canary in the coal mine for product. Paul is championing this, and I love this. The customer is not an engineer either. Care
Totally right.
represents the genuine voice of the customer. So, how important do you think it is for care to also carry that agile mindset
Yeah.
that product and engineering oftentimes are employing? So, how do you teach them how to be agile, and what benefits do they get from that?
Yeah, this is one of the things I think I'm most excited about in the way that we operate. We actually have structured care like a product team. So for the work that we do, so whenever we improve a tool, whenever we improve a process for a customer or for an agent, we work as a product development team with our dedicated engineers, designers, product people who work on our tools, and they work alongside trainers and vendor managers and content developers, right? So part of like I think you're exactly right. It's really hard to talk to a product team and speak their language if you don't know what it's like to develop product or to think in an agile way. So all of our, I'd say the majority of our people on our internal team work already in agile scrum teams themselves. So they speak the language, they understand the mentality, which is about experimentation. It's about testing and learning. It's about iterating and delivering small increments of value versus deciding that we know everything at the beginning and just sort of planning everything out from the start. And so I think giving them that language makes them even more influential with product people and engineers.
Has it also then been going into product again? Has Care found a career progression
Yeah,
going into other places in the company now that they have this additional like intel behind them?
absolutely. No, we've had people move into the product org. We've had people move into QA and engineering. We've had people, move into design. I feel so strongly care is such a great applicant pool, a talent pool to move to different parts of the company. And I think, again, exactly, you're right. Like getting them experience working in this way, for some people, it just shifts something in their brain and they're like, this is how I want to operate. We actually have like 2 people on the team right now who are acting as product owners of our own Scrum teams, acting as like product managers who have no product training. One person is leading our team that specifically works on insights, has no data background, has no insights background, but as soon as she started working that agile way, something clicked in her and we just saw like, you should be doing this. You're really, really good at this. So it's a great place. It's a great way to like build those skills and give people career paths outside of care.
And it's also another great argument, if you need it, to bring some of your teams back internally,
Yes.
so that you do have that constant flow of new
That's right.
talent in the org. So let's talk a bit about technology. And Brian is very interested to know what's in your tech stack from a care perspective.
Yeah, so we've changed everything in our tech stack over the last few years. We've tried to simplify as much as possible. We use a combination for our interaction channels. We use Zendesk for email, and we use it for guide. We use Amazon Connect for our live channels, so real-time channels, chat and phone. And then we've built a lot of this sort of a lot of the data we stitch together on the back end ourselves. So we do our own sort of surveying of customers, our customer effort score survey. We do that on our own by like stitching together all the interactions on the back end. But yeah, and then today we use a not very good CRM called Sugar CRM. It doesn't really meet our needs very well. So we're actually in the middle right now of just reimagining what the agent workspace should look like in our particular environment. So I think we're kind of starting with a blank canvas there, really thinking about what should it feel like, what should it look like if I'm an agent turning on my computer for the day. So I think more to come there.
Oh, I love the whole agent workspace, agent, like the design that goes into what an agent should see when they first log in the morning. That's such
and what it should feel like, right? What should it feel like to them? It's an exciting project to be working on.
That is an exciting project. All right. We love to talk about metrics on this program, and you've mentioned customer effort score a couple of times, which is one of my favorite metrics. But I'd like to know why the Times chose that as their North Star metric, and what does it do, not just for the care organization, but for the rest of the company?
Yeah. So customer effort score came out of a book called The Effortless Experience. I want to say almost 10 years ago now. And if you haven't read it, absolutely read it and make your teams read it. It's a really, really fantastic book. It's based on this premise that a lot of teams think the thing to do to encourage loyalty in our customers is surprise and delight. It's the stories that you hear of these like amazing experiences. Someone sat on the phone for 10 hours with a customer to like, they bought them pizza, they did whatever, right? And the research basically shows that it's fleeting. Those stories are sort of like stick out in our minds because they're actually really rare. They're hard to replicate. And anyone has a team of more than 5 people knows like it's really hard to operationalize that, right? Some companies do it. Zappos, Nordstrom, like that's baked into their DNA. But like really, what this research found was the best determinant of customer loyalty, meaning repurchase rate, share of wallet, word of mouth, is the amount of effort that they have to put into solving their problems, right? And you measure that with the customer effort score, which is a 7-point or a 5-point question. To what extent did the New York Times make it easy for you to solve your issue? 1 to 5 from strongly, or 1 to 7 from strongly disagree to strongly agree. You take a top 3 box there answer, and that's your percentage. For the research shows that it's highly correlated with loyalty. We did our own study and our own data to see whether people were actually New York Times subscribers were less likely to churn. They were. Whether they were more likely to read more articles in the app. They were, in a statistically significant way. So I also think it was important for us to show like, Are we an exception to this? No, this
Right.
actually holds for us too. So it has a real impact. And when I can go to a team again and say, hey, we have this metric that if I push up, if I increase customer effort score, you're going to see fewer games customers churn out, and you're going to see more engagement with your game. That's a really meaningful pitch to them.
Absolutely. And I see several people in the chat who are talking about CES. And for those who aren't as familiar, the book is certainly worth a read. Matt Dixon is one of the co-authors. He's been on our programs several times. Wonderful speaker as well. And he talks, uh, very candidly about how so frequently in support organizations, we're spending all this time on trying to fix and wow post a bad experience versus not have the bad experience at all. And I think that probably comes back to one of your comments around wanting to be forgettable.
Yeah.
Where it should and could be forgettable if you aren't having to encounter these big ahas that then require you to swoop around and try
That's
to
right.
fix something in this big, manner.
I mean, one of the other things in that research that I loved was the diminishing returns of meeting expectations. It's
Yeah.
this idea that, like, if I just meet your expectations, if I just get your problem solved, and if I do that as quickly as possible, you'll forget that you ever reached out to
Or
care at
upset to
all,
begin with.
right?
Yep.
And you'll think your perception of the brand is going to be that game, that recipe, that journalism, right? It's not going to be talking to an agent, right? And that's like, in most cases, that is my goal. I want you to forget that you ever had to reach out to us at all.
I like that. Well, I told you this would go fast, and we have time for about one more question. But first, I just want to remind everyone to please rate your experience at today's session. If you liked it, which it sounds like from most of you in chat, you really did. So please respond to that Google survey link that one of my colleagues has dropped in the chat. All right. And you do have a few fans in the audience. Lawrence just wants to say how great your self-service is.
Oh, that's amazing.
Anytime he's had a challenge, he's been able to address it quickly through self-service with very little effort. So
That's amazing. I'm so happy to hear that.
towards what we have just talked about. All right. Last question for you, Jeff. How do you see the New York Times continuing to move forward with an ideal customer experience? And what is that ideal when you think about it?
I want every interaction that someone has with a New York Times care agent to feel and sound and uh, like the Times. And so one of the ways that I talk to my team about this, and I talk to other people around the company, is, if I just showed you a random interaction, would you, brand person, would you, engineer, feel proud of it, right? And so that's my goal, is I want us to feel proud of those interactions and for them to feel like the Times. So for me, one of the things I'm focusing on in the next couple of years, I feel like we've gotten a lot of the technology stuff really well, done and good. And I want to really focus on that care experience, and start to finish, does it feel like the Times? And again, part of that is having more internal agents. Part of that is better self-service. Part of that is just like understanding the entire journey. But I want to feel proud of it, and I want everyone at the company to feel proud of it.
And definitely you want your care team to feel proud of the
Yeah.
work they do. Oh, big thank you, Jeff. That was such a great conversation. I know we could have kept talking for quite a while yet.
Yeah.
And a big thank you to everyone for listening and joining on this moment with us today. Please join us on October 27th for a different session. We're going to call this an EX moment, where we're going to talk with Modern Health about the employee experience. So please join us then. Until then, stay safe, be helpful, and we'll chat again soon. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah.